Anatoli Boukreev was a Soviet-born professional mountaineer who conquered many summits during his career. His name hit headlines across the world in May 1996 when Anatoly on his own saved 3 hikers who had nearly perished trying to conquer Everest. For his actions, however, Anatoly was not only praised but also criticized. Merely a year later, Anatoli Boukreev died in the Himalayan mountains. Why does Boukreev remain such a controversial figure in the history of mountaineering? Where was the famed climber laid to rest? In which Hollywood movie does Boukreev's character appear? Make yourselves comfortable as we begin today's story, in which you will find answers to these questions and more. Anatoli Boukreev was born on the 16th of January 1958 in the small Russian town of Korkino in the Chelyabinsk Oblast. In the outskirts of Korkino lies the deepest coal quarry in Europe. Chelyabinsk Oblast is an agriculturally and industrially developed region with many factories, deposits of ore, graphite, titanium, coal, precious and semi-precious gems. Such substantial mining opportunities have to do with the fact that the Chelyabinsk Oblast is home to the southern part of the Ural Mountains, which stretch some 2,000 kilometers from the Arctic Ocean to northeastern Kazakhstan. Chelyabinsk Oblast holds a unique place on the map of Russia as it is located at the meeting point of Europe and Asia. The region is a fairly young one, having officially existed for only 87 years. When Anatoly was born, his parents only had 2 children. His older siblings were named Sasha and Luba. Sometime later, Ira and Kola were born. The father of the Boukreev family, Nikolai Vasilievich, repaired musical instruments. The mother, Valentina Andreevna, worked first in the local transport department and then in a workers' club. In the Soviet Union, clubs were synonymous with culture, enlightenment, and art. Anatoly Boukreev went to the Korkino School No. 2, from which he graduated in 1975. He found school to be easy and was especially successful in some subjects. One of his brothers would later recall that Anatoly was often exempt from chores at home because there was always some contest that he was having to prepare for. Most of all, the future mountaineer loved physics. Boukreev was fascinated by the mountains since childhood. This was in part due to the proximity of the southern Urals. Many people in Korkino engaged in hiking and mountaineering. Anatoly was no exception. When he was 12 years old, he joined the local Young Geologists Club, led by Tatyana Rytunskaya, who would later earn the titles of Master of Sports in Mountaineering and Honored Teacher of Russia. She remembered Anatoly as being the smallest, both physically and in terms of age, but he hauled his backpack not a step behind his fellow students. The mountains soon became the boy's passion. To improve his stamina, he took up cross-country skiing and trained relentlessly at home, as well as in the school gym, cultivating his physical form. However, in spite of his excellent training, Boukreev wasn't allowed to take part in proper ascents for medical reasons. That is, until USSR mountaineering champion and trainer Yuri Rytunsky, the husband of Tatyana Rytunskaya, helped the boy get a mountaineering ID, going against existing rules. Yuri Rytunsky and Anatoly Boukreev will ascend many peaks together, but that will be later. Before that, Anatoly decided to continue his education and enrolled at the Chelyabinsk State Pedagogical University, where he earned a degree in teaching physics. He also became a certified mountaineering instructor, which allowed him to work at the local mountaineering club. After university, Boukreev was to be assigned a job, as was common in the Soviet Union. Most university graduates couldn't choose a job because the state had already predetermined their workplace, where young professionals had to work for 3 years. Anatoli Boukreev was assigned to his own school in Korkina, but he didn't lose courage and decided that his future was in his own hands. Somehow he managed to talk the authorities into sending him to the capital of Kazakhstan so he could be closer to his beloved mountains. Boukreev treated the mountains with a special trepidation. Though he was a successful climber, he never bragged about it, firmly believing that the most important part of any ascent are the mountains and not the person. Boukreev's destination, Alma-Ata, was the largest city in Kazakhstan. The city is surrounded by the ridges of the northern Tian Shan, and Kazakhstan in general is known for its mountainous terrain. The ranges on its territory include the Urals, the Tarbagatai Mountains, the Altai Mountains, as well as other systems. In his new home, Anatoli Boukreev also became known as a courageous and hardy athlete. During his time in Alma-Ata, he was conscripted and served in the sports troop of the Middle Asian Military District. Everything was well until suddenly he contracted meningitis, a dangerous infectious disease. Anatoly's mother, Valentina Andreevna, went to Alma-Ata to look after her son. The contrast was striking. The man who had overcome extreme weather conditions, climbing tens of thousands of feet, now could hardly walk, having to lean against the walls to drag himself across the halls of his dormitory. But Boukreev refused to give up. He decided to start his recovery through special exercises and homemade solutions, the recipes of which he found in some magazine. In spite of the grim forecasts of his doctors, Anatoly managed the impossible, achieved a full recovery, and continued his mountaineering career against all prohibitions. Boukreev started attempting serious ascents when he was still a student. After hikes with a group of geologists through the Urals, Anatoly began during his summer vacation to conquer peaks of over 4,000 meters in the Tian Shan. This impressive mountain range spans the territory of several countries: Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, China, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. At the age of 22, Boukreev conquered his first peaks of over 7,000 meters, Lenin Peak and Communism Peak, now known as Ismail Simoni Peak, at 7,495 meters, or 24,590 feet. It was the highest mountain in the Soviet Union. After serving in the army, Boukreev stayed in Kazakhstan. He lived not far from the capital and worked as a trainer in the local children's skiing club, often spending his own money to buy skis for his students. Later on, he became a mountain guide. Quick climbs with a small load and no supplemental oxygen became Boukreev's trademark. To put it simply, Anatoly didn't take a large amount of warm clothing with him, which allowed him to reach peaks quicker, spending less time and energy. His colleagues, friends, and acquaintances recalled that keeping up with his climbing tempo was extremely challenging. In his speed of ascent, Boukreev seemed unparalleled. When he was 27, he was awarded the title of Snow Leopard, which was given for conquering the highest peaks of the Soviet Union. In 1987, he successfully attempted a solitary speed climb of Lenin Peak and was added to the ranking of the Soviet Union's most promising mountaineers. In 1989, Anatoly joined the Second Soviet Himalayan Expedition, and on the 15th of April 1989, as part of the team of Valery Krushatov, without using supplementary oxygen, he made his first ascent of a mountain of over 8,000 meters, the Himalayan peak of Kangchenjunga. The same year, he earned the title Honored Master of Sports of the USSR International Class. His name became widely known in the mountaineering milieu. After his ascent to the third highest peak in the world, Boukreev was often invited to film festivals that presented movies about the mountains, as well as to other events that had to do with mountaineering. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Boukreev got dual citizenship of Russia and of Kazakhstan. He then moved to the USA, where he started working as a mountain guide. However, he never applied for US citizenship. Firstly, he never had any problems entering or leaving the country, and secondly, he saw the mountains of Kazakhstan as his home, a home he didn't want to lose. Here's how Boukreev himself described it. "I'm a citizen of the world. People say to me, Anatoly, you train in America, live in Kazakhstan, and were born in the Urals. To which I reply, indeed, that's how things worked out, and I spent most of my time in Nepal." In 1995, Anatoly was entrusted with the life of the president of Kazakhstan himself. He became Nursultan Nazarbayev's personal guide during a mass ascent of a bay peak, which reaches 4,010 meters, over 13,000 feet in height. In 1996, Boukreev accepted a job offer from Scott Fisher's trekking company Mountain Madness and became a guide with a US firm. They were planning to organize the first commercial ascent to Everest, the highest point of the globe. Conquering Everest was not only dangerous, but also an exorbitantly expensive endeavor. At the time, each member of the group paid about $65,000 for such an adventure, plus other expenses, special clothing, the trip to the base camp, and accommodation. Nowadays, conquering Everest has become slightly cheaper, around $55,000 for the services of a Western company and $35,000 for those of a Nepalese firm. But no amount of money, insurance, and training can help one predict how the forces of nature might behave at an altitude of almost 30,000 feet. It is perhaps for this reason that in 2020, Nepal suggested tightening the rules for those seeking to conquer Everest. Climbers would be required to present evidence of having conquered peaks of at least 6,500 meters, as well as documents indicating that they're in good health and physically trained. And given what happened on Everest in May 1996, this seems to be a wise decision. During his time at Mountain Madness, Anatoly dealt not only with organizational issues, but being an experienced climber was tasked with providing a comfortable ascent for clients. Scott Fisher knew well that Boukreev was excellently trained, had conquered many peaks, and knew a lot about the subtle details involved in climbing some of the highest mountains in the world. Compared to that, linguistic difficulties, at that point Boukreev's English wasn't particularly good, seemed a trifle. Fisher had been in the mountains with his new guide and understood that being an eloquent English speaker was not important for a successful ascent to Everest. What's important is being sure that your partner is reliable, and one could definitely rely on Boukreev. Joining Fisher and Boukreev for that ill-fated ascent was a less experienced guide, Neil Beidelman, as well as a group of Sherpas who functioned as porters and guides. They were to accompany a group of 8 Mountain Madness clients aged 33 to 68, who were ecstatic at the very thought of climbing to the highest point in the world. Alongside the Fisher-Boukreev group, there was another team preparing for the ascent, led by New Zealander Rob Hall, co-owner of Adventure Consultants. This company is to this day still in the business of helping people make their dream of climbing Everest come true. In the spring of 1996, Hall's team consisted of 2 guides, Sherpas, and several tourists, one of whom was the writer and journalist John Krakauer. It was John who would later write a book about the tragedy that occurred on Everest that year. If we take a closer look, we'll see that both groups had accomplished climbers as well as inexperienced newcomers in them. And already, we can say that all the participants were ready for extreme situations. On April 8, 1996, the Mountain Madness team arrived at base camp at the foot of Mount Everest, which was the starting point of their ascent. Already, a number of hikers were complaining about different health issues, including Scott Fisher and Neil Beitelman. Nonetheless, preparations for the ascent continued. On April 13th, the group made their first high camp at 6,100 meters, or 20,000 feet. The hike proceeded routinely until on April 19th, the team noticed the remains of a dead mountaineer next to their camp. Someone was bound to perceive this as a bad omen, though experienced climbers know that human remains in such places are a common occurrence. Expeditions often even use them as waymarks during their ascent, their frozen bodies in bright jackets eternally watching over the mountain. Unprepared clients, however, were shocked by the find. Almost a week later, on April 26th, the heads of several expeditions, Scott Fisher from Mountain Madness, Rob Hall from Adventure Consultants, Todd Burleson from Alpine Ascents International, Ian Woodall from the Sunday Times-sponsored First South African Expedition, and Makalo Gao from the Taiwanese Expedition, decided to join efforts in clipping the ropes from Camp 3 to Camp 4. But first, they had to reach Camp 3. On their way, the 45-year-old Dale Cruz, a friend of Scott Fisher's who had no experience climbing at such high altitudes, started feeling ill. It was decided that he would be sent back. Cruz made another attempt to continue his ascent, but continued to feel ill, decided not to risk it, and started his descent. Scott Fisher was beginning to worry. His clients were not as healthy and well-trained as he had expected. Their hikes from camp to camp took too much time, and he was constantly having to move the estimated summit day. As he led his team to the summit, he told Himalayan Guides member Henry Todd that he was worried about his people and didn't like how things were going. On May 9th, Fisher and Boukreev led their team to Camp 4, which is located at 7,906 meters, or 25,938 feet. Rob Hall's group from Adventure Consultants, as well as several other climbers, also set out for Camp 4, leading to a total of 50 hikers staying in it at one moment. However, instead of a comfortable shelter, the adventurers were greeted with foul weather. As Boukreev himself put it, the plateau became a truly hellish place, if hell can even be that cold. An icy wind knocked the hikers off their feet, reaching speeds of over 60 miles per hour. Empty oxygen bottles left by previous expeditions were scattered all over the place, alarming Fisher's clients, who weren't that well acquainted with how one dealt with professional equipment. Several hikers wanted to once again delay the summit day, but Scott Fisher and Rob Hall decided against that. In the morning of May 10th, the groups were to start the final stage of the ascent. They set out for the summit right after midnight. A total of over 30 people had embarked on the route that day, making the trail very busy. Hikers from the Taiwanese expedition joined the teams of Fisher and Hall. The ascent was supposed to take about 10 to 11 hours, but it turned out that there were no ropes installed on the route, and the teams spent several extra hours anchoring them. By 6 a.m., some of the hikers had reached the so-called balcony at 8,400 meters, or 27,500 feet. Because of how thin the air is here, there is a strict time limit on how long people are allowed to sit on the balcony. However, the line of those who were dragging behind was huge. The hikers were obviously unprepared for such a challenge and progressed too slowly. In addition, it turned out that the ropes leading to the southern summit weren't ready for use, and another whole hour was spent on fixing them. Around 100 meters remained till the summit, It was sunny and clear, but several adventure consultants' clients decided to turn back, feeling they didn't have enough strength. At 1:07 a.m., the first person of the expedition reached the summit. It was Anatoli Boukreev. Several minutes later, journalist John Krakauer joined him. According to the rules, the ascent to the summit and the following descent were to take place before 2 p.m. Wherever the climbers were, descending after 2 p.m. wasn't safe. However, the teams continued their climb in spite of that, which guaranteed them trouble in the near future. At 2:30 p.m., Anatoli Boukreev started to descend. He understood that the way down would be very difficult for the exhausted team, so he decided to reach the camp as quickly as possible, pick up more oxygen bottles, and return to the descending group that would be accompanied by the rest of the guides. As mentioned previously, Anatoli's climbing speed was unparalleled. He moved quickly towards the camp, understanding that the fate of those remaining near the summit depended on him, and also fixing the ropes that were incorrectly anchored by Sherpas. At around 3 p.m., the weather under the summit swiftly started to deteriorate, and a heavy snow started to fall. Unperturbed, the groups continued their climb. The last person to reach the summit was Scott Fisher. He arrived on it at 3:45 p.m., almost 2 hours after the recommended turnaround time. Now, after many years, to us it seems unsurprising that a disaster occurred that spring day. The teams started their descent at a dangerous time and ended up in a snowstorm which covered the waymarks to Camp 4. Adventure Consultant's head guide, Rob Hall, stayed on the Hillray step near the summit, where one of his clients, Doug Hansen, had lost consciousness. The reason for that could have been altitude sickness or some underlying health issue, in spite of which Doug decided to embark on the expedition to Everest. Rob Hall radioed the camp, which promised to send help. About 10 people who were descending ahead of the rest ended up not reaching Camp 4, wandering in the darkness and snow, having lost any hope of being rescued. Several people huddled together, hoping that it would be easier to survive the storm together. Only a few meters away from them lay a deep abyss. The second act of this drama took place in Camp 4, where Boukreev had gone. He went from tent to tent, asking other mountaineers to help with the search for the hikers in distress, but got one refusal after another. Nobody wanted to set out for certain death. Boukreev decided to adhere to his plan nonetheless. He picked up a supply of oxygen and went back up. In the following few hours, he found and brought back 3 people: Charlotte Fox, Sandy Pittman, and Tim Madsen. Several other people from both groups managed to return to the camp on their own. At around 5 a.m. the next day, the camp received a message from Rob Hall, who was still near the summit. He reported that the person who had come to help them had reached them but soon disappeared. This was when Doug Hansen, who was the first to lose consciousness, died. Hall himself couldn't use bottled oxygen because its regulator was choked with ice. Several hours later, he radioed the camp once more and used the satellite connection to call his wife to say goodbye. He understood that he couldn't make the descent. His hands and feet were severely frostbitten. Hall's body was discovered 12 days later. On May 11th, a group of Sherpas that had gone to look for the other missing hikers found Scott Fisher in Makalugao, the head of the Taiwanese expedition. Fisher's condition was so serious that the team didn't risk bringing him down and left him on the slope with an oxygen mask, taking the Taiwanese guide with them. The last attempt to save Fisher was made by Anatoli Boukreev, who reached his friend at around 7 p.m. of the same day. By that time, Fisher was dead. Boukreev later made another ascent along the same route, where he surrounded Fisher's body with stones, and took his ice pick to give it to his family, as is the sad tradition among professional mountaineers. The ascent was very challenging, and Boukreev himself wasn't sure if he would return. Anatoli often said that ascending a mountain is only a small part of the climb. It's important to be able to descend safely. Another American hiker, Back Weathers, managed to reach Camp 4 when everybody had already given up on him. He survived, but had to undergo several surgical operations, and because of frostbite, had his nose, all his fingers and thumb on his left hand, as well as his right arm halfway between the elbow and wrist amputated. A total of 8 people died in the 1996 disaster. Guides Scott Fisher, Rob Hall, and Andrew Harris, who came up from Camp 4 to help Hall, their clients Doug Hansen and Yusuke Numba, as well as 3 hikers of the Taiwanese expedition, Tsewang Smonla, Dorje Morab, and Sewang Paljar. News of the disaster shook the world, and especially the mountaineering community. Questions were raised about climb safety and the hikers' levels of training for such adventures. Journalist John Krakauer, who was part of Rob Hall's team, fueled this discussion even more with his book about the ill-fated climb, in which he blamed Boukreev for the disaster. He accused Anatoli of becoming confused, incorrectly assessing the situation, and showing irresponsibility by leaving the team on the peak. What used to be Boukreev's trademark became a target for criticism. Krakauer condemned his choice to dress lightly and not carry supplementary oxygen. Nonetheless, the mountaineering community took Anatoli's side. Professionals understood that without his involvement, the number of victims could have been much higher. It was Anatoli who, without a care for his own life, went to save those in distress when most people in the camp couldn't be bothered to exit their tents. Besides, Anatoli didn't go to the camp on a whim. It was part of this tragedy that had been discussed with Fisher in advance. According to this plan, after helping his clients reach the summit, Boukreev was supposed to go back down and return with oxygen bottles to accompany the exhausted hikers on the last stretch of the way, which would be the most challenging. And in Boukreev's team, only one person died, Scott Fisher. Boukreev rescued 3 people, the rest managed the descent with a second guide. Most of the deaths took place in the New Zealand team, which had different guides. As for Scott Fisher, Boukreev went after him as soon as he found out from the Nepalese rescuers that he might still be alive. Still, Krakauer's book had its unsavory fact. The version that the deaths were Boukreev's fault was accepted by many, even though professional climbers had taken his side. This development didn't stop Boukreev from continuing his mountaineering career. Soon, he also wrote a book about the disaster, but the unpleasant impression left by Krakauer's book remained. Boukreev understood that the journalist had received a hefty sum for writing a book about the disaster, and found it distasteful that the tragedy was described in such a biased way. The author made the moody Russian into the main villain of the story, though it was this moody Russian who had asked Krakauer to help with rescuing the stranded hikers. Krakauer was already in his tent at Camp 4 and declined to offer help to his dying teammates. Galen Rowell, mountaineer and wilderness photographer, pointed out in an article for the Wall Street Journal that while Krakauer slept and no other guide, client, or Sherpa could muster the strength and courage to leave camp, Mr. Boukreev made several solo forays into a blizzard in the dark at 26,000 feet to rescue 3 climbers near death. Rowell described it as one of the most amazing rescues in mountaineering history, performed single-handedly a few hours after climbing Everest without oxygen by a man some describe as the Tiger Woods of Himalayan climbing. Finally, on December 6, 1997, Boukreev received the David Soles Memorial Award from the American Alpine Club, which is given to climbers who have rescued people in the mountains at risk to their own lives. The fact that Boukreev's actions were recognized at such a high level supported the point of view that Krakauer's book was speculative in its desire to find someone to blame for the disaster, and Boukreev was the only guide who survived. It would have been considerably more unpleasant to concede that the reasons for there being so many deaths were poor training, the decision to go against the recommended ascent and decent time, and bad weather. People die on Everest all the time. The hikers that took part in that expedition had health problems, some of which became apparent even before the start. The mountains do not forgive such fecklessness. And what of Anatoli Boukreev? Unfortunately, he received the award only 19 days before his own death. On December 25, 1997, Boukreev, together with Italian mountaineer Simon Moro and the Kazakh cinematographer Dmitry Sobolev, started their ascent to the crown of the Himalayas, the deadly peak of Annapurna. Moro and Boukreev wanted to take a difficult route that no one had attempted before. If successful, they would open a new chapter in the history of Himalayan mountaineering. When they arrived, however, poor weather conditions made them change their plans and opt for a safer route. Moro went in the lead, placing anchors, with Boukreev and Sobolev belaying behind him. At around 12:15 p.m., at 6,500 meters, or 19,470 feet, a snow cornice collapsed, causing an avalanche. Here's how Simone Moro, the only survivor of the tragedy, recalls it. "Shards of ice and pieces of rock fell on me through the cloud of snow. I think I only managed to warn Anatoly and Dmitry of the danger. I remember them darting to the side in an attempt to escape the avalanche. It was 12:37 p.m. when I stopped, half buried in the snow at an altitude of around 5,500 meters. I was blind on one eye, my hands were cut to the bone, my clothes were turned to shreds. I tried radioing Anatoly and Dmitry, but they didn't answer. I walked along the snowdrift for 15 minutes, but didn't hear a sound from them." Pumped with adrenaline, Moro managed to climb down. Once he reached the closest Nepalese village, he reported the incident. By that time, 10 hours had passed since the avalanche, and Simone understood that both of his teammates were likely dead. 3 days later, he flew over the area on a helicopter but found no signs of there being any survivors. In early January 1998, rescue teams and experienced mountaineers conducted another search operation but didn't find the bodies or any other trace of Anatoly and Dmitry. Anatoli Boukreev died in the place he loved the most, the mountains. At the foot of Annapurna stands a memorial to Boukreev with his words inscribed on it. "Mountains are not stadiums where I satisfy my ambition to achieve. They are the cathedrals where I practice my religion." Anatoli Boukreev never married. He often said that his dangerous line of work isn't conducive to peaceful family life. However, in the last few years of his life, he was in a relationship with Linda Wiley, an American GP who was also enamored with mountaineering. They met each other during a mountain expedition, and Linda became Anatoly's partner not only romantically, but also in climbing. Wiley recalls her beloved with warmth and affection, remembering him as a resolute, honest, reliable, and at the same time gentle person. She told reporters that Boukreev was strong-spirited, smart, and ready to make sacrifices for others, especially in the mountains. He also had an excellent sense of humor. In her interview, Linda recalls how during a challenging climb of theirs to Marble Wall Peak, Anatoly, who was far ahead of her, suddenly turned back and approached her. In his hands was a butterfly that the wind had brought to an altitude of 6,000 meters. This was Anatoli's gift to Linda, meant to encourage her. Indeed, Linda cheered up and confidently continued onward. When Jon Krakauer's book was published, Linda was on Anatoli's side. She too found the writer's accusations to be unfair. After Boukreev's death, Linda didn't practice medicine for a year. During that time, she wrote a book dedicated to Anatoli and the story of their love. It was her efforts that led to Boukreev's memorial being installed at the foot of Annapurna. After his death, she became the executor of his estate and founded the Anatoli Boukreev Memorial Fund. Every year, it organizes a competition among mountaineers from Russia and Kazakhstan, the winner of which gets the opportunity to go to the US and climb Mount McKinley, the fund paying a hefty part of the associated expenses. In 2015, the film Everest, directed by Icelander Baltasarson, was released. The movie was based on the memoirs of climb survivor Beck Weathers. It suggests that the main cause of the tragedy was the rivalry between the teams of Hall and Fisher. Anatoli Boukreev was portrayed by Icelandic actor Ingvar Egert Sigurðsson. The movie enjoyed a warm reception, and its account of the disaster ended up being considerably more truthful than that given by Jon Krakauer. Anatoli Boukreev is to this day remembered by the mountaineering community, and those who dedicate their life to this dangerous activity hope to one day be at least a little bit like him. If you found today's story interesting, share it with your friends and subscribe. If you have ideas about other mountaineering stories that I could make a video about, share them in the comments. Stay safe.